Well, hey, AP Biology, hope you're doing well when you watch this. Welcome to part 2 of our genetics series, finishing up Unit 5. This is going to be dealing with pedigrees. And so I want you to kind of look at this pedigree of a lot of different kings in Europe, including the Spanish dynasty, the Habsburg dynasty. And I want you to notice a few things, and let's just kind of highlight a few things here. Let's go right here. Anna of Austria and Philip II. That is uncle and niece having Philip III. Okay. We have first cousins right here, once removed, with Philip. There's Philip IV. Uncle and niece again with Philip III and Maria Anna of Austria, which is like right here and right here. And so these are consanguineous, I believe I said that right, unions. Of course, marrying within the family and having children within the family, inbreeding. And genetically, it's pretty rough, right? Why though? Why genetically is it rough for the family and for this dynasty in particular? Because it was so bad, actually, that Charles II, good old Charles right there, he was kind of mentally and physically unable to function very well. Okay, and so this inbreeding depression actually caused something called the Habsburg jaw. And there's many different articles about that. This is actually a fascinating article, and they go into like the genetics behind it and all that. And this is where I clipped this pedigree from that article, and also have this table right here showing you kind of like, first cousins once removed, uncle, niece, lots of different first cousins once removed again. And so what happened was this mandibular prognathism, I probably butchered that, prognathism, is it is a genetic disorder that causes like an overdevelopment of the mandible or the jaw. Okay, this is the mandible, and this is the bone above it is called the maxilla. And so this condition was so pronounced that some members couldn't eat correctly or speak correctly. And then Charles II, the last in the Habsburg line, why? Because of all this genetic inbreeding depression, right? As we're going down here, we're not getting anything new in the gene pool. The gene pool is staying the same. We're not getting genetic variety, which is good because it can sometimes, shuffle out deleterious mutations or SNPs or various alleles. And but we didn't. We constricted the gene pool. And so the increase of genetic disorders and increases the frequency of them, okay? Because you just can't shuffle, meiosis can't change the genes that are there. And so it was a big problem. And so pedigrees, like this one, but we'll show simpler ones, but pedigrees can show Mendel's laws. Remember, 2 laws, law of segregation and independent assortment. And so humans have few offspring, so pedigrees do not show the clear proportions that pea plants show, but pedigrees can show patterns. Okay, so the pattern of inheritance if a rare allele is dominant. Okay, so dominant, which means it shows up if it's around. And so every person with the abnormal phenotype has an affected parent. That's the first clue to figure out, okay, well, what does that pedigree look like? So one of the goals in this pedigree is to understand when you're given a pedigree, what type of inheritance are we looking at? Also be able to create them. Again, on the AP exam in May, highly doubtful that you have to create a pedigree, but you might have to analyze one, probably so, right? So being able to analyze them is very, very important. I'm not saying you don't have to create one, but it takes a long time, and they're pretty good about, maximizing your time as far as graphing and all that. So either all or half of the offspring is, so here's an example of dominant inheritance. And notice how it's in every single generation, okay? Now, this trait, it doesn't necessarily have to be a disorder. Like, we could be talking about, free earlobes, right? Unattached earlobes. And so that is an example of a dominant trait. You know, we don't have to do that. Here's a recessive trait. And notice that these guys are carriers. We also consider someone that has a trait that doesn't express it a carrier. And so you can see right here in the double line means made between relatives. So if we were to draw this in circle and squares, man, there would be tons of double lines, right, in this Habsburg dynasty. And so, of course, a square is a male and a circle is a female. Usually they don't color in half when they show it a carrier. Usually they'll just leave it clear or blank, which I'll show you here in a second. But notice, let's just use letters, right? Notice that if this woman was this and this woman was this and this is a recessive inheritance, they're not expressing it, but their son does. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to mean a disorder, something dangerous. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but it definitely means that he is expressing it because he has two recessive alleles. And so given the follow-up pedigree, is the trait indicated by the darkened shapes a dominant or recessive trait? And so pause and try to figure it out. Pause right now on your paper, try to figure it out. And unpause. and so anyways, hopefully after thinking it through, hopefully you kind of highlighted like this side, right? And so what this side shows is that dad doesn't have it, mom doesn't have it, but both their kids have it, which means these guys had to be carriers of some sort, which means this is a recessive trait, okay? This is an example of a trait, but I'm actually going to pause on this one and go over this one in class. This is actually hemophilia. Remember from video 1 and the tragic story of the Jewish family who lost 2 sons through circumcision and being able to not stop bleeding. So hemophilia is a blood clotting disorder, but it's actually carried on the X chromosome. So this is actually a sex-linked problem, and we haven't talked about it yet, but I'll go back into it after, maybe in class after we talk about, that'll be in part 3, I believe, the different forms of inheritance and the different functions. Okay, so pedigree is a family tree, of course, family history. Okay, pedigrees can be used to make predictions. Like, people are genetic counselors these days, can make predictions. We can use the multiplication and addition rules to predict the probability of specific phenotypes. Pedigrees are a serious matter when the alleles can cause disabling or deadly diseases. We'll talk about some of those right now, just think about it. Some people today, or whenever you're watching this, some people today might go in for genetic counseling and they tell them, all right, hey, it's a 50% chance to have a kid with this deadly disorder. Would you take that risk? People have to make those kind of decisions today. And so here's a pedigree analysis. So widow's peak is dominant. No widow's peak is recessive. Widow's peak is just kind of like a little point on your hairline. And so you can see right here, second generation, and then parents, aunts, uncles, and here's our family, right? And so she has a widow's peak and she does not. Sisters, both her parents had the trait, but yet she didn't, so indicates a dominant trait. Okay. PTC is a bitter chemical. I don't usually do that lab. Usually I do like cilantro instead, but it's we have different tasting abilities. Cannot taste and taste. Can taste is dominant. Cannot taste is recessive. Notice like the look on her face, like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. Yeah, it's pretty bitter stuff. But that is seen as a recessive trait, right? And so that's just an example of that. Many genetic disorders are inherited in recessive patterns. They range from mild to life-threatening. Again, there's that term carrier. I would definitely highlight that carriers are heterozygous individuals that carry the allele, but are phenotypically normal. So here's an example: albinism, recessive, and of course you should see the error here. That's not right. It should be that. So fix that on your paper. And sorry about that. And so carrier, right? Carrier. And so guarantee we are carriers of various things. We won't know it unless we get a genetic test done. And so recessive alleles that cause a disease is rare, then the chance of 2 carriers meeting and mating is low. Consanguinous matings increase the chance of mating between 2 carriers, thus increasing the probability of expressing a disease or a disorder that lowers the fitness of the offspring. And so that's what happened with the Habsburg dynasty. Okay, different types of genetic disorders. Autosomes are any chromosome other than the sex chromosome. These are 1 through 22 for human beings. Okay, dominant, right, has a disorder. Recessive does not. You know, like 2 little A's does not have the disorder. Recessive, of course, carrier right there, but AA does have the disorder. Okay, and so this is an example. You gotta be careful here, right? Recessive, and you would be like, oh man, this could be recessive. Well, no, if it's both recessive, the only options for getting alleles is a little a from one parent, a little a from the other. So this one has to be dominant because you have to have the ability to give the recessive allele that doesn't encode for the trait. Okay, and here's an example again of recessive alleles. Notice, since first cousins mated, the chance for carriers increased. And notice how high the affected children are, the probability, the percentage of children are, right? Like we go 2 full generations without seeing the trait, but yet we see the trait in the 4th generation because of a consanguineous union, okay? This is just an example. Bluish skin, blood causes skin to appear bluish, but relatively harmless. Why does this matter? Well, a perfect example. I don't know if you saw it. I never saw it. I've heard about it, like 6 feet apart or something like that. Netflix. I don't have Netflix. But nonetheless, cystic fibrosis, yeah. There's more than 1,700 mutations in the cystic fibrosis gene. But if you have a disorder, and notice just one example. But if you have this disorder, your life is dramatically altered. You make really thick mucus. You have to cough it up. You have to take medicine. This is a shaker vest that you have to use to like loosen the mucus and cough it up. Through medicine, they have greatly lengthened the lifespan of precious human beings created in God's image that suffer with this disorder. But it still, does lower your life expectancy and all that. But look at one such defect. So glycine. So when they write stuff like this, glycine is the the symbol for, the amino acid. And aspartic acid is symbolized by a D. So what it means is at location 551, when there should be a glycine, instead there's an aspartic acid. And notice the difference. Just notice, we're going from an H to a highly polar, right? This has a charge, crazy charges here. So a highly polar amino acid, which hopefully you think, well, we're changing that. We're changing the fold of the protein, so therefore the protein doesn't do its job correctly. Okay, more than 1,000, mutations. What happens is that the channel breaks down shortly after it's made, so it never reaches where it should make, and it's transporting chloride ions, which makes mucus thin, But instead of making it, thin and watery, it doesn't work correctly, so the mucus is very thick and it obstructs the airways and the glands, leading to cystic fibrosis. And so, yeah, this stuff matters, right? So if you were the carrier of a cystic fibrosis mutation and you married someone who was a carrier as well of a similar mutation, possibility of having a child with cystic fibrosis. Phenylketonuria, if you have a pack of gum, you can see this like attention phenylketonurics. People they lack an enzyme, so genetically they don't make a protein correctly, needed for metabolism of this amino acid. Therefore, it appears and it increases. And I talk about this more in like genetics, but babies with this disease are okay, but put on low diets with low phenylalanine until the brain is fully developed to prevent brain damage. Here's just an example of a dominant pedigree. Notice how it's in every single generation. Okay. And then it's completely nullified or weeded out right here because this girl inherited both recessive alleles, married a man with both recessive alleles, and so this trait will not be in their children. Okay. And so just some examples of dominant disorders. osteogenesis imperfecta. You can probably figure out like not making bones correctly. Hereditary spherocytosis. And again, this is just examples. I'm not going to ask you these things. Huntington's disease is a tragic disease. Leads to progressive degeneration of brain cells. It doesn't, so what happens is you're normal until middle age. So people usually have children before they realize they have Huntington's disease. And so the children, you grow up and you're like, oh, wait, I have Huntington's disease. Now my children possibly have, and this is where it leads to like genetic testing for children and stuff. But what do you want to know? That's another interesting ethical and kind of like philosophical question. Like, if you had a genetic disease that wouldn't show up until your middle age, like, would you want to know now? Would you want to know later? Would you want to wait until you're a certain age? It's just kind of, it opens up all these conversations. So anyways, that's this is unit 5, part 2. Hope this was helpful. Thank you for watching. God bless.